They began not with a parade, but with a whisper. In the summer of 1940, as German forces marched across Europe and France collapsed in just 6 weeks, Britain stood alone. The British Army, still recovering from the devastating retreat at Dunkirk, lacked speed, reach, and presence beyond its shores. Yet it was at that moment, when survival felt uncertain, that Winston Churchill issued one of the most defining wartime orders of his career: "We must set Europe ablaze." Those 4 words carried a new strategy. Not of armies but of shadows. The idea was radical. Small, agile teams would launch sudden hit-and-run attacks across occupied territory, striking where the enemy felt safe. These were not conventional soldiers. They would fight with deception, sabotage, and silence. Officially, they were called commandos, but their role extended far beyond brute force. Some war historians now propose that their initial purpose may have been less about destroying enemy positions, and more about retrieving information the British could not afford to lose. The early missions were makeshift. Training grounds emerged on the rugged western coast of Scotland, where men were drilled in night landings, close-quarters combat, freezing endurance tests, and amphibious assaults. They trained at Achnacarry Castle, navigating obstacle courses with live fire, often going days without rest. One recruit later wrote in his diary, "They were not testing our strength, they were testing our will." Units such as No. 1 and No. 2 Commando were formed rapidly, pulling in soldiers from across the Commonwealth. Many had no idea what they were really being prepared for. Their first operations, including Operation Collar in June 1940, were small raids on the French coast. Success was moderate, but London considered them proof of concept. What went mostly unmentioned in official reports, however, was the priority given to capturing documents, communication logs, and even civilian records from occupied French administrations. These were classified findings, rarely listed in after-action reports. But they were noticed at Bletchley Park, Britain's code-breaking headquarters, where a spike in intercepted German naval messages soon followed each commando raid. The growing connection between raids and intelligence was never formally confirmed, but traces of it appear in internal memos. One document from July 1940 reads, "Enemy files should be considered of equal value to equipment or prisoners. Obtain them discreetly. Attribution must be obscured." This message wasn't signed, and no one has claimed authorship. Yet the language closely matches Churchill's mindset: cripple the enemy using any means necessary and do not wait for permission. To mask these objectives, raid reports often highlighted material damage, fuel depots destroyed, supply lines disrupted, guard posts eliminated. The public read of heroic strikes across the Channel, but few ever heard of missing files or recovered maps. Even the men involved sometimes knew only fragments of the plan. One lieutenant recalled being instructed to leave a farmhouse untouched, despite its strategic location. "No explosives. Check the basement instead," he was told. Only years later did he suspect why. As the commando legacy grew, so did doubts and secrecy. Units were frequently reshuffled. Soldier rosters changed unexpectedly. Certain officers transferred to undisclosed departments, often linked later to MI6 or naval intelligence. By late 1940, specific raids were being coordinated directly with codebreakers at Bletchley. Yet most files surrounding those operations remain redacted or listed as lost during archival transition. Missing but never confirmed destroyed. Still, there was a transformation. Morale rose within Britain. Newspapers reported courageous strikes, and the commandos became a symbol of resistance during one of Britain's darkest years. Yet beneath the praise lay a structured system of intelligence gathering that could not be openly discussed. Families wrote to the War Office asking for details about sons lost in raids that were never officially acknowledged. Some replies simply read, "Service details are unavailable, further information classified." Today, historians debate the true purpose of the earliest raids. Were they tactical strikes or experimental intelligence missions disguised beneath the chaos of battle? What exactly was being taken from enemy territory, and why were so many mission logs incomplete? Many believe the answers lie not in battlefields, but in archives where documents remain redacted, and stories remain unfinished. If the birth of the commandos began in the shadows, what secrets were they gathering while the world believed they were simply attacking? And how far would Britain go to keep those secrets hidden? It was cold even by northern standards. On March 4, 1941, the Lofoten Islands in Norway lay covered in snow and silence. To the Germans, it was a distant and relatively unimportant outpost, vital only for its fish oil factories, which supplied glycerin used in explosives. But on that morning, more than 500 British commandos, Royal Engineers, and Norwegian volunteers were on their way to change the map of the war, or so the official story would later claim. This operation would be remembered as Operation Claymore, the first major commando raid of the war. Commanded by Brigadier J.C. Hayden, the force set sail aboard several destroyers including HMS Somali, HMS Bedouin, and HMS Eskimo. The planning was precise, the briefing direct: destroy production facilities, disrupt enemy supply routes, and return safely before German reinforcements could respond. Yet, unbeknownst to most of the men, another objective lay hidden beneath these orders, one involving intelligence, encryption, and silence. The assault began before dawn. Local Norwegian resistance fighters guided the landing teams through icy waters as commandos stormed ashore at the towns of Stamsund and Svolvær. Factories were rigged with explosives, fuel stores ignited, and German positions overrun with surprising speed. More than 225 German prisoners were taken. But one event that morning never appeared in front-page reports. A group of specialists broke away from the main force and headed for a German office building near the harbor. Inside they searched not for weapons but for documents. They seized operational logs, radio frequencies, and what one officer described as communication cards and machine components of unknown type. These were rushed back to the ships under heavy guard. Later, fragments of this intelligence would surface at Bletchley Park, offering crucial insight into German naval movements, particularly U-boat routes in the North Atlantic. The raid became known as the moment when German naval codes began to fracture. One diary note written by a commando named Alan Hughes reads, "We destroyed their buildings, but someone kept asking for papers. They looked for files like treasure. I am certain there was another mission I wasn't told about." He died 3 months later during a separate operation. His diary was never officially logged in military archives. It was found decades later by his family. The Germans were stunned. They had expected sabotage, not precision intelligence gathering. Days after the raid, the WWII, Germany's counterintelligence agency, interrogated local civilians who described British men searching drawers and safes. Some questioned whether this was a new kind of warfare, not of destruction but of extraction. Declassified British files from the 1970s suggest that this search for documents had been prioritized even before the attack plan was written. But perhaps the most curious detail lies in the aftermath. Instead of simply reporting the raid's success, the British government exaggerated the scale of destruction, as if to bury mention of anything else. Newspapers spoke of 11 factories destroyed and massive explosions lighting up the coast. Photographs were staged. What was never photographed was the removal of one single metal lockbox, carried by a sergeant whose name disappeared from post-war records entirely. Modern military analysts argue that Operation Claymore marked a turning point, the moment British raids evolved into intelligence missions disguised as battlefield victories. Historian Dr. Margaret Willis wrote, "It is tempting to view Claymore as the first example of dual-purpose warfare, a strategic diversion covering a data capture." This interpretation raises new questions about other early raids. Were they all simply hits on German industry? Or were the commandos collecting something we weren't meant to know existed? In the 1990s, partial cables from Bletchley Park surfaced referencing items retrieved from north of the Arctic Circle, Claymore. No official acknowledgement followed, and the phrasing was vague even by intelligence standards. But after Operation Claymore, U-boat sinkings increased sharply. German naval strategies adjusted. Something had changed. Perhaps it began here, in the silence of a Norwegian harbor, when the world believed explosives were the only weapon used. But somewhere inside those snowy buildings, the British found more than machinery. They found secrets the enemy thought were safe. And those secrets may have shaped the war more than any explosion ever could. The world knew of the smoke, but not what was carried quietly back through it. Few soldiers in World War II carried rifles with one hand, and a briefcase with the other. But the men of No. 30 Commando did exactly that. They were not just fighters, they were hunters of information. Trained not only to infiltrate enemy territory but to extract intelligence on the spot, they operated behind a curtain of secrecy so dense that even fellow officers often had no idea who they were. They had another name too, the Intelligence Assault Unit. And in time, their missions would raise more questions than answers. The origins of No. 30 Commando trace back to 1942 and an unexpected source. Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming, a naval intelligence officer and future creator of James Bond. Fleming believed that crucial German documents were often abandoned during chaotic withdrawals, but only if someone could reach them before they were destroyed. His proposal to Churchill and Naval Command was simple and bold. Establish a small force trained to storm enemy sites specifically in search of intelligence, not ground victories. Churchill approved. Recruitment for No. 30 Commando was selective. Members came from Royal Marines, Army intelligence, and linguists capable of reading German technical papers. Some were rumored to have criminal backgrounds or skills rarely seen in military files, lockpicking, forgery, or even safecracking. Training was split between Scotland and Hampshire, where they practiced speed reading of maps, infiltrating offices, and identifying types of codebooks from memory. One training memo read, "If the file burns, we lose a battle." Their first major outing was the Dieppe Raid, August 19, 1942. Officially codenamed Operation Jubilee, the raid was disastrous. Over 3,600 Allied troops were killed, wounded, or captured. But lost in the headlines was a peculiar detail. Attached to the force was a covert detachment from No. 30 Commando. Their assignment: penetrate the German headquarters near Dieppe Harbor and seize signal logs and cipher materials. What they found has never been publicly disclosed. Only vague mentions appear in archival fragments, partial documents, technical diagrams, and a single chilling phrase, "Certain items never reached England." Some believe these missing items may have been intercepted during transit. Others suspect they were too sensitive to reach official record books. A private note by Ian Fleming himself reveals, "We aimed to open the doors, but some doors opened back at us." This passage has puzzled historians for decades. What did Fleming mean? What pushed back? After Dieppe, redactions around No. 30 Commando intensified. When they deployed to Sicily in 1943 during Operation Husky, they successfully captured enemy maps of minefields and detailed coastal defenses. But certain reports vanish in mid-sentence, with pages marked "Transferred, Special Section." Family letters from soldiers referenced activity around airfields with "strange hangars" in Italian towns. Some soldiers never returned. Official causes: operational confusion. Personnel lists soon became patchy. Commanders rotated inexplicably. Post-war historians struggled to trace the fates of specific members. One name, Corporal William Mack Roberts, appeared repeatedly in Sicily reports, but no death record exists. His family received a letter that simply read, "His service was valuable." No further details are available. He remains unaccounted for. The secrecy extended even to equipment. No. 30 Commando was known to carry specialized satchels for document recovery, fingerprint brushes, and glove-lined pouches for handling sensitive materials. Rumor has it they even tested an early kind of voice recorder prototype during raids, though no surviving devices have been found. Some claim they reported directly to Fleming. Others say their orders bypassed even him. An intriguing connection emerges when we compare their mission logs to recorded data gains at Bletchley Park. Spikes in German signal interception consistently follow No. 30 Commando operations, especially after Dieppe and Sicily. These weren't random coincidences. Something was being captured, transmitted, and deciphered. But what? As the war progressed and Allied forces gained ground, No. 30 Commando expanded into a larger, more specialized unit, eventually forming the basis of modern UK Special Forces intelligence teams. But its deepest files remain sealed or missing. A 1968 inquiry attempted to locate several of their original after-action reports, only to find that many were irretrievably destroyed by moisture. Archivists later admitted the storage facility showing damage had experienced no flooding. Perhaps what they found was too important or too dangerous, ever to surface in full. For while No. 30 Commando helped change the course of the war, they also changed how wars would be fought, where information became as valuable as territory, and silence became as powerful as victory. Their trail vanishes in fragments of ink, lost personnel files, and unanswered questions. What did they really discover, and why do some of their missions remain unspoken even today? There are two kinds of battles in war: the ones the world sees and the ones fought in silence. By 1943, the British Commando raids had become famous: swift strikes, explosive assaults, dramatic photographs, and newspaper headlines proclaiming bold attack in occupied Europe. But behind the blasts and smoke, a quieter strategy was unfolding. Some raids, as later discovered, were never about what they seemed. They were distractions, carefully orchestrated diversions designed to conceal the real mission, the collection of intelligence too valuable to reveal. Hints of this double strategy emerge in official records. A classified memo dated August 1943 reads, "Maintain standard sabotage narrative unless otherwise directed." Specific access points must remain outside general knowledge. The phrase access points puzzled researchers for decades until other surviving documents pointed to Luftwaffe radar stations along the French coast. These stations, often thought to be targets for demolition, were in some cases ignored entirely, while nearby administrative buildings were thoroughly searched by small, specialized teams. This tactic became clearer in Operation Anklet, December 1941 on the island of Vagsøy, Norway. The raid was short and fierce. Factories destroyed, oil tanks ignited, and German positions neutralized. But lost among the noise was the movement of a smaller detachment. They bypassed combat zones and instead entered a coastal office, removing encryption tables used for local transmissions. These were sent directly to Bletchley Park, their existence never mentioned in standard reports. The newspapers praised the raid for its destruction. No one mentioned it for its extraction. Not even the soldiers always knew the hidden plan. Sergeant Harold Mason of No. 2 Commando wrote in his field journal, "Explosives set, objectives clear. Yet one of our officers gave orders to delay detonation until a smaller group had searched a storehouse with no military value. No one explained it." Years later, a German intelligence officer named Hans Kupper confirmed suspicions during a post-war interview. He stated, "We noticed odd activity, British soldiers examining rooms that held no weapons. They appeared to be searching for letters, not fighting us." Kupper described it as unsettling. They fought with haste but searched with patience. The pattern grew stranger during Operation Archery, conducted on December 27, 1941, again in Vagsøy. While commandos attacked factories and German barracks, witnesses reported sightings of men carrying leather satchels, moving separately from assault teams. One local fisherman recalled, "They were different. They ran into buildings nobody else cared about." After the raid, British intelligence reported an unexpected rise in Luftwaffe communication traffic, consistent with Bletchley Park gaining new cipher material. What makes these operations even more mysterious is what didn't happen. Certain high-value targets were deliberately ignored. A coastal fuel depot containing thousands of liters of petroleum was left untouched. A German patrol boat escaped undamaged despite being within range. Some historians now argue that major destruction might have compromised the secrecy of intelligence collection, and that chaos was carefully limited, not maximized. By mid-war, coordination between commandos and intelligence services grew closer. Some officers' names disappeared from unit rosters and reappeared in files labeled Special Liaison. A few of these men later emerged in intelligence divisions of the British Armed Forces or MI6. Their wartime service records, however, remain partially or entirely redacted even today. The Dieppe raid in 1942 raised even deeper concerns. Though widely criticized as a disastrous frontal assault, some analysts believe a secondary objective was concealed beneath the heavy losses: capture of technology related to radar calibration and encryption. One rumor even suggests that the radar station outside Pourville was the real reason the raid occurred at all. If so, human lives were spent not for territory but for transmission frequencies. These theories, once seen as speculative, were given weight when fragments of declassified communication logs surfaced in 2003. They referenced C-intel retrieved via diversion and priority papers from Target 3 administrative block. The files were vague yet enough to fuel renewed debate. Were British raids designed as theatrical cover operations? And if so, how much was sacrificed to keep those secrets out of public view? Modern warfare analysts see echoes of these tactics in today's Special Forces strategy. Distractions, limited engagements, and targeted intelligence recovery all became hallmarks of modern covert warfare. But for the commandos who fought on the ground, the truth was rarely shared. Most believed their missions were purely tactical. Some, to this day, may never have known how their daring assaults concealed larger intentions. The explosions were loud. The cameras clicked. The world saw fire and smoke. But while attention focused on burning buildings, quiet hands opened drawers, cracked safes, and carried secrets into the night. We remember the raids for their destruction. But maybe we should be remembering them for what they took. History often ends exactly where the truth begins, in silence. Between 1942 and 1944, British commandos conducted dozens of raids across Norway and France. But certain missions, particularly those involving coastal facilities, remain incomplete in official records. Not lost, not misfiled, simply absent. It is in these gaps that historians sense something extraordinary. Reports that should exist do not. Names appear once, then vanish. Even family testimonies hint at something unspoken, soldiers returning quieter than they left, avoiding discussion of what they had seen. The war diaries of several commando units reveal strange patterns. A comprehensive log of No. 10 Commando's activity in France breaks off abruptly in July 1943. The typed page ends mid-sentence. Team relocated for secondary objective, guarded transmission S, before cutting to white space. The following pages are blank. Not torn. Not faded. Blank. When questioned years later, a surviving officer claimed the mission was routine. But no details were offered, and his tone, according to interviewing historians, shifted rapidly and became withdrawn. To this day, the location of that mission remains undisclosed. At the same time, families back home noticed changes. Some soldiers sent letters filled with humor and vivid detail until a certain point. Then the writing stopped. One wife, Margaret Royston, received a final letter from her husband dated September 26, 1943. It read, "We are headed to a small port. Our task is light, no worry. If I return quiet, know it is only because I cannot speak of it yet." He came home 2 months later. She reported that he never spoke of the war again. Even during post-war interviews, he refused to give any account. Not silence out of trauma, but silence out of purpose. What could lead to such deliberate withholding? Some believe British forces encountered advanced German technology, prototypes that were never publicly acknowledged. Others argue that soldiers inadvertently discovered internal Allied power struggles, involving intelligence factions competing for control of information. These claims would be easy to dismiss as speculation, except for several redacted debriefs that mention the phrase, "sensitive intake from target site. Personnel to remain restricted." One particular case stands out, Operation Checkmate, April 1943, a raid carried out by a small team from No. 14 Arctic Commando. The raid aimed to sabotage German shipping routes near Norway. Most of the team was captured. Official history claims they were executed at Sachsenhausen concentration camp. But in the archives, 2 names lacked death certificates. And in 1957, a former MI6 officer claimed at a private seminar that, "We evacuated more than explosives that night." No follow-up questions were allowed. The strangest clue may lie in the post-war years. Some commando veterans received unusual employment offers, not military but administrative roles in government departments with no public-facing purpose. Their files contain service records marked with a vague note, "Ongoing discretion required." Even today, descendants of these men occasionally receive letters advising them not to pursue certain documents about family military history. A widow in Edinburgh reported receiving one such notice in 1974, accompanied by a handwritten P.S. "He kept our country safe in ways neither of us could ever put on paper." Military archives provide a telling comparison. For regular raids, records are standard: unit sizes, casualty counts, objectives achieved. But for certain operations, sometimes involving entire battalions, we find only a single line, "classified." The lack of detail is almost louder than words. Were these missions darker than public history could permit? Or simply too influential to reveal? Modern analysts now refer to this as the silent ledger, the missing corridor of World War II that, if filled, might reshape our understanding of Allied operations. Some files, historians argue, may be sealed until the late 2030s. Others may have vanished entirely. And some might remain hidden in private collections, military basements, or the memories of aging veterans who vowed never to speak. In a 1981 interview, one former commando was asked if he believed all records would eventually be released. He replied slowly, "You think the war ended, but some doors never closed. They were just locked." The question stands, what happened where the records end, and why does silence still surround those places? When the guns fell silent in 1945, Europe began to rebuild. Cities rose from the rubble, soldiers returned home, and archives began filling with the paperwork of victory. But some documents never made it to the shelves. For the British commandos who had operated in secrecy for years, searching, recovering, and protecting critical intelligence, their final mission was not on the battlefield. It was in keeping the past quiet. Many commando veterans were instructed not to speak of certain raids. Some received direct orders to omit parts of their service history. Others found that their debriefs were not archived under military records but transferred to special storage. That storage, believed by some to be tied to early MI6 infrastructure, became a shadow vault. Even today, very few researchers have access to all of what lies within. The post-war era brought new demands. Intelligence gathering evolved rapidly with the creation of modern organizations such as GCHQ and expanded operations within MI5 and MI6. Several former commando officers were quietly absorbed into these new entities. Their knowledge, particularly in infiltration and rapid intelligence extraction, became the blueprint for modern special operations doctrine. Some historians at Sandhurst argue that these commando techniques were the first modern special forces tactics ever deployed in Europe. The United States noticed too. Figures within the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, studied British commando operations closely. Joint intelligence meetings held in 1944 showed significant interest in the distraction strategy used in Norway and France. When the CIA and the U.S. Army Special Forces were officially formed in the post-war years, some historians believe that playbooks influenced by British raids were used as reference material. One document found in an American archive reads, "Mobile data recovery teams, concept adapted from early British models." Even German officers recognized the brilliance of their enemy. After the war, former Abwehr agent Wilhelm Falkenberg commented, "The British attacked loudly but listened quietly. They were not just fighters, they were collectors." His statement, though brief, captures the evolution of warfare itself. As technology advanced and communication systems grew more complex, intelligence became as valuable as territory. The commandos were among the first to understand this shift. And yet, for all their achievements, a troubling question lingers. Why are so many records even today still sealed? Why do certain missions remain unacknowledged? What exactly did they uncover in those coastal offices, abandoned bunkers, and silent harbors? Answers may exist in archives scheduled for public release in the coming decades, but some may never surface at all. In 1976, a former commando officer, speaking anonymously, was interviewed about the role of secrecy after the war. He said, "I saw files with locks on them. Not padlocks, but time locks. They couldn't be opened until certain people were gone." His voice, according to the interviewer, trembled as he spoke. This legacy of silence is not merely historical, it is psychological. Some research suggests that commando veterans displayed higher rates of controlled restraint rather than trauma. They didn't break down. They withdrew. Not from pain but from duty. They had been trained not only to endure combat, but to protect information at any cost. Perhaps this is why their legacy is so difficult to trace. These men were never meant to be seen. They fought in the dark, worked in silence, and left history without applause. But the world they helped build, the world of modern intelligence, covert operations, and special forces strategy, remains their enduring footprint. Today their influence is everywhere. In how wars are planned, how information is gathered, and how nations quietly protect themselves before threats emerge. But their names are rarely known. Most lay in unmarked folders or faded letters. Some may still be guarded by time locks. And so the legacy of the British commando raids is not just found in history books, but in the shadows between them. In the pages missing from archives. In the files stamped classified. And in the unspoken truth that some victories are never celebrated, because no one is allowed to know they happened. Perhaps one day the final records will be opened. Until then, the silence remains part of the story.